I've been asked to speak with you concerning my own journey to priesthood. I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the holy work that you have agreed to do as a member of this club. If you've ever been on the Camino, if you've done the Camino, you know that the symbol of the way is the pilgrim shell. And you'll notice on that shell there are many different lines, different paths, different ways, but they all converge into the great church in Santiago. My theory of vocation is very similar to that. I am always impressed with the stories of my brother priests or seminarians, how that we come from different backgrounds, and that there's no one way to the vocation of priesthood. However, they all converge at a certain point. My own story is somewhat different than the typical priest story. I was not raised a Roman Catholic. My father was military. He was in the Air Force, and we were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And as I get older, I am more aware at just really how waspy my family is. I am the most outgoing of all of my siblings. We were a very reticent family, a very private family. We would kiss our mother, shake hands with our father. To cry at a funeral was very unseemly. Grief was something to be done in private. So the older I live, the more I understand my family system, its strengths, its beauty. I think every family and the blessings that I was given through my mother and father, not Catholics. And I've often wondered, Lord, how in the world did you ever get this little Baptist kid out of Protestantism and into all places the Roman Catholic priesthood? Well, it begins with a tragedy. My grandfather, my father's father, died young of cancer. I never met him. He died when I was 2. We were in Massachusetts at the time. His early death meant that my grandmother had to go to work. And she was of a generation of women who didn't even drive. My grandmother never even learned to drive because that was not something that women did in her day and age. She took a job at the Catholic hospital in Fort Smith, Arkansas, Mercy Hospital. They were staffed by the Mercy nuns, the same Mercy nuns at our Mercy Hospital. So my grandmother begins working with these nuns. She loved the sisters. Never very impressed with the fathers, but she loved the nuns. And they would give her prayer cards and holy images. One of my earliest childhood religious memories was when we came home to her place in Spiro, Oklahoma, outside of Spiro. We would go there on our 30-day leave. Mom, dad, 6 kids descending on my grandmother's place for 30 days, which I would think would be horrible. But nonetheless, it was what was left of the family farm. And for a boy, it was a wonderful place. All this acreage to explore and a pond to fish, and there were cows. You spent the whole day outside, and in the evening you chased fireflies on the lawn. Well, there was this image in her house of this man who sort of looked like Jesus, but was not the Protestant Jesus. And his heart was exposed, and there was fire around his heart. And I remember I would stand there and contemplate it. And one day I asked my grandmother, I said, "Who is that?" And she said, "Well, that's the Catholic Jesus. The nuns gave me that." And I said, "Well, why is his heart on fire?" And she said, "I don't know. It's something that Catholics believe in. These religious images that the nuns gave to my grandmother, then that called to me when I was a boy. I have this theory that your future is buried in your present. The Lord is already preparing you for your future. Now, on Air Force bases in the 1960s, again, you were outside all day long. Your mothers kicked you outside, and you played, and we often played touch football. And the guys who owned the football, the brothers who owned the football, were Catholics. And we would play touch football until they had to go to altar boy practice. And that shut down the game because they took their football with them. They always made altar boy practice sound like it was like being a Marine. And they told us how hard it was, and you had to memorize these prayers in Latin. And they talked about it in such a way, it was so inspiring. I went home one day after a football game, a touch football game, and I said to my mom, I want to be an altar boy. And my mom said, we're not Catholic. So even in my boyhood, there was this calling. First, of course, the calling to the church, to a different life in Christ. I mean, I was baptized in a Southern Baptist church, and I felt convicted, and I felt a calling to ministry. I would watch Billy Graham on television, those massive revivals he would have, and I remember feeling stirred in my very soul, and I thought, this is what I must do as well. I must go out in the world and preach the gospel. So these two different callings coexisted. And when I went to college, by then I was really dissatisfied with the faith life that I had known. Felt that I was looking for something else. And one day I had the courage to knock on a rectory door. And the priest came to the door, and now I kind of laugh about it, but I told him, I said, I'm looking for God, and I was wondering if I could talk with you. I try to remember that when random people come to my door and ask things like that. And I will never forget what he said. It was actually Father Jim White, of the rest his soul, of the Tulsa diocese. And Father White at one point said, you are looking for God, but God has already found you. And he and I came to the conclusion that I really needed to begin attending Catholic Mass. I was in college, and I did so unevenly. I think one reason why I have such a heart for college ministry is because that was the true beginning of my journey into the Catholic Church, my journey to the Roman priesthood. So I went to Mass unevenly. I graduated from college. I took a job back in Fort Smith, Arkansas, working for a media company that's no longer in existence, but I was in the newspaper business. Everyone thought I was Catholic, but I was not. I simply would go to Mass. I often would leave before communion because I felt awkward. And I still had this struggle within me. I felt a calling to ministry, but I didn't know how that would translate into the Roman Catholic Church. I didn't even know if they let converts become priests. But I knew the first thing I needed to do was to join. So I got up the courage one summer morning at my office. I picked up the phone, and it was very intimidating to call a priest. And I called Christ the King Parish in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and I asked if I could speak to the priest, and he gets on the line. Of course, I'm nervous. And I told him, Father, I've been discerning becoming a Catholic for many years, and I've made the decision. I would like to receive instructions and join the Roman Catholic Church. Well, he said, it's summer, and I'm about to go on vacation. And when I get back, the associate pastor will go on vacation. And do you think you could wait till fall? And yes, Father. I hung up the phone, and I love telling this story. And I turned to the guy at the next desk, and I said, the kingdom of God is closed until fall. I just thought that was so new. I found the Roman Church rather hard to join once I decided to. But I went to the classes, and there was this woman in the class who had debated becoming Catholic for many years. And that year, her family finally relented and gave her their blessing to become a Catholic. She and I kind of bonded. And I went through this 2 semesters of what is the RCIA program now, and thought so highly of the priest there, Father Strock, rest his soul. And this woman kept saying to me, you should be a priest. You should be a priest. And late in the formation before Easter, she began developing these headaches and could not come to the class. And it turns out she had a brain tumor and passed away before Easter, but they brought her into the church before she passed away. And this woman who was there with her said, now, before she died, she told us all that you were going to be a priest. Now, I had never confided in this woman. I'd never shared anything with her, but she saw something. And it's so important for young men to hear the call, not just from a priest. They need to hear it also from lay people. They need to hear, hey, you would make a great priest. I mustered the courage to go talk to Father Strock, and I just sort of poured out my heart. I've always felt that I was called to ministry, but now, I'm a Catholic, and I just don't know how this would work. And when I finished, he said, Jim, I was a Methodist. So he was also a convert. And I credit Father Strock for being the priest there for me in that moment that gave me his blessing. I think that's another important part of vocations. There needs to be a calling from lay people. A calling from your family, is so important to many men. And then also that moment when a priest sort of gives you his blessing. So I applied to seminary and was accepted and went and loved it. I loved seminary. I loved the studying. I loved the close bonds that you make with guys in the seminary. I think because my journey into the Catholic Church was so long, 6-7 years, discerning that. Once I did get to seminary, I never really did have a crisis of vocation or a crisis of faith while I was in seminary. It just seemed very natural, like I was in the stream I needed to be. And now, having been ordained for, almost 29 years now, I realize at the depths of my soul that this is my calling. Now, sometimes I do ask the Lord, why in the world did you choose me? I don't think I'm as gentle and patient as most priests are. I think I'm a very kind of different sort of priest, not afraid to tell you what I think, very direct and I'm also a lawyer. So there is that in me. And I do sometimes think, Lord, I don't understand, why you chose me for this, but he did. And as you know, until you surrender to your vocation, until you do the will of God in your life, you have no rest, you have no peace, you have no assurance or great hope for salvation. It's only in the surrendering to what is your vocation in which we find our true and lasting happiness. So in a nutshell, that is my story, and I'm sticking with it. If you have any questions, I don't know how much time you have remaining, but I always love to field questions. Yes, ma'am.
How did your family react?
Great question. Great question. They reacted very well to me becoming Catholic because it took so long. And by then they were just, Jimmy is going to be a Catholic. He's our Catholic. That was no problem. When I gave up my job, my apartment, all of that, they were alarmed. And I think they thought perhaps I was going off to join a cult or something. So it took them a while to accept that part of it. Seminary is a very long process and an impoverishing process. When I was in, there weren't lots of people helping to support seminarians. And if there's one thing I did not enjoy about it was the humiliating and grinding poverty. I did not like that, but that's my WASP thing in me still. So I support seminarians. I urge people to support seminarians for that. Eventually, my mother died before I was ordained a priest. She died young of cancer, and I was a deacon. So I had clerics. I went to see her in the hospital not long before she died, and she said, "No, go home, put on your suit, and come back." Now, there was like a snowstorm and icy roads, but, dutifully, I went down, got in the car, went back to their house, put on my whole clerical suit, and came back. She wanted to see it. And that's kind of the moment she gave me her blessing. And my father, God rest his soul, became very interested in where I was going to be assigned. So he came around and sort of threw his weight behind the project, because he wanted to know where they would put me, and he wanted me, there was a rumor that I was going to go to Ardmore, and he loved that idea. Because he didn't want to drive in Oklahoma City, but he thought he could easily get to Ardmore. And so he was actually very supportive. It took some time, but they were very gracious. One, we have been fortunate in my time at St. Thomas More that we have sent a number of men to seminary. And I've been privileged to hear and talk with them, on a very kind of personal level about the call. I've also been blessed to work with seminarians in the summer who have come to my parish to spend a summer. And I so enjoy just sitting down with them and talking about, when did you feel the calling? Who is it in your life that nourished your calling? What do you hope that you will be able to do with your priesthood? There have been a number, actually. One of the young men who put an application in to Father Brian, I love that photo, by the way. It looks like he's in the Alps, is a man from my parish. So we have a new applicant, and that's a great cause for rejoicing in my office and in the circles there at Thomas More. So a number of great stories that I've heard. Common themes. There's always an obstacle to priesthood, a fear that must be overcome. It's a common theme. The fear of, what if my parents are disappointed? That's one of them. The other fear is, will I be a good priest? Can I really do this? Can I be faithful and holy to this life? Common themes that I hear, but you have to let the man come to his own conclusions about that. You can't give them ready answers. You have to walk with them and to listen. And I give them sort of transparency to my priesthood. I'm one of those guys, what you see is what you get. I don't believe in compartmentalizing my life. So they see the priesthood in all of its goodness and its flaws and challenges. Yeah. So, great question.
How long have you been at St. Thomas?
It's my longest assignment. I will be there 12 years 11 years this year, and then I hope to do the full 12. The longest I've lived anywhere my entire life is Norman, Oklahoma. So Norman, Oklahoma feels like home. I've never lived anywhere this long. Yeah. And we've done good work there. The parish, when I came, I told the parish leadership, everything changes. Everything changes now. The little sleepy student center that was so charming, very charming. But I told them, I said, you have to grow and things have to change. So with the bishop's support, we brought in Focus, the missionaries who helped me work the campus. And then, of course, the building of a new church, a proper church for the center. It's been a great time, Yeah. I think there are two critical ages to do that. If you have a son, a daughter, or a grandson, granddaughter, and if you approach them about the 8th grade, this may seem counterintuitive, But when you talk to people who have vocations, very often they begin thinking of it seriously at that age. Now, it's too young to make final decisions, but to give them encouragement at that age and to make sure that they have appropriate access to priests and nuns. To have a priest over for dinner, for example, is a great way to show young people that, Father is not some remote figure up on the altar. That's a great way to do it. And then when they are in their college years, to support them and to say, hey, have you ever thought about being a priest? You have many gifts and talents, and you can be used by God in many, many ways. The priesthood could be one of them. To let them know, especially in families now where there are fewer children, and a great, great concern is that the parents would oppose it. I never thought I'd live to see the day when that would be one of the great concerns, but it is. So simply to be supportive of it. We had a young man at Thomas More, an only child, and his parents had to get past that natural longing for grandchildren. They had to get past the natural inclination to want your son to go on and do other things, to be a physician in their case. And it took them some time. So the more supportive, the more open, and to talk about it. And again, to give them appropriate access to priests and women religious if it's a young woman. I think it's very important. Yeah. To pray. Yeah. So what this club does is a great ministry to the Archdiocese.